All right. So in Photoshop, what you're going to want to do is make sure that you have your image open. Does everybody have an image open? Okay. And I want to go through some of the basic functions. First of all, under a window in the Photoshop menu, I want to make sure that you know how to get back to a baseline menu. If you're ever working in Photoshop and you're wondering where did my toolbar go or where did that window go, then you can change your workspace to a specific setting. Okay. Typically, the essentials or the default is going to be just fine, and that's going to give you plenty of options to change colors and work in layers and other modes like that. I don't. As I see this, though, I don't particularly like that. Let me switch it back to photography. All right, that seems better to me. So photography looks like a good layout to use because we're going to be working with photos. And what we really need to have here is the menu toolbar on the left. And we really want to be able to manipulate layers over here on the right side. This time lamp at the bottom isn't really necessary. I can close that, give myself a little bit more room. Josh?
How did you download the picture? Did you just do it as
So to open this image, all I did was navigate to my Google Drive, okay, and then I went to the class folder, and then if you were to look into the student folder, and just go to your student folder, Josh, and here's your 24 pictures. So all your images are here, and we're just going to work in one of these right now as an example, so you can click on the one you want to work on. And then under the More Actions menu, you can choose to download that image. And once it's downloaded, it's going to go into your Downloads folder, so you can easily access it back in Photoshop, choosing File and Open. Now, the file that you just downloaded is going to be in the Downloads folder. This one is yours, and I will click Open. And there we have it. Make sense? All right, so everybody's got one open? Do you want me to wait while you guys are getting one open? It's okay. If you need help, just let me know. How big do I want you to make it? Well, all I want you to do is open the file, so I don't want you to change any sizes right now. Do we all got something? Joan, are you good yet? Do you need me to help you? Okay. All right. So the next thing we want to do is just take a look at some of the basic options we have in Photoshop on the toolbar. And this is the toolbar here on the left. It's kind of set off to the side. I can actually move this around if I want to. I like to keep it tidy, though. It'll snap to areas. If you were to move it around, you could snap it back into position. That's up to you. So this top function is the selection tool, and that's how you can actually grab the stuff that's in a layer. The layers are represented over here on the right. Right now, this photo is on a layer called background. I can't really do anything with this photo because it's locked. And so in order to do something, I'm going to unlock it. And the easiest way to unlock it is to double click on the layer in the layer menu option here. And that's going to bring up this dialog box. And I'm just going to choose OK. I'm not going to change any settings. I'm just choosing OK. And now my layer is no longer a background layer. It's unlocked. I can actually grab that. I can move that around. Okay. I don't want you to move it around, but using the selection tool allows you to manipulate things in the layer. As long as the layer is selected, which it is right now. That makes sense? Okay. So next up on the toolbar, we have this rectangular marquee tool. And what that allows you to do is make rectangular selections. And those lines that you see, sometimes we call them marching ants. That's kind of like a term I've always heard it used, but it makes a little bit of a selection, indicating that that's kind of a active selection. You see that moving box going around there. It just so happens that it's rectangular by default, but if I were to click back on that tool and hold it down, there's a couple other options available to you, like the elliptical marquee tool, and then there's a single column horizontal and vertical. It's kind of blocked by that tool hint right there. So if I were to want something that was more circular or an oval, I'm clicking and dragging with my cursor, and I can select that portion of the photo. Now, the reason you would want to select something in the photo is so you can manipulate it in some way using some kind of filter, or like what we're going to talk about later, adjustment layer. We can change things like brightness, contrast, hue, saturation, and we can change things like opacity. So if you are looking to make edits to very specific portions of a photo, the marquee tool is one way to do that. Now, I'm not just limited to shapes. There's another tool called the lasso tool here, just below the marquee tool. And the lasso allows me to get very specific with what I'm selecting and the shapes that I'm selecting. So right now I have this ellipse selected. If I start to click and drag that around, it's going to let me choose a whole new set of things, and it's going to make that ellipse go away. So I'm just kind of outlining his head. Emmy, did you have a question? Sure. You don't really have to ask me. Okay. Now, you can see I have a general selection here, but it's a little wonky. I didn't quite get everything. When you're using the lasso tool, sometimes it's nice just to zoom in. So that's another tool here at the bottom of the toolbar. The magnifying glass or the zoom tool lets me zoom in. And if I want to get more specific, I can add selections by holding down Shift and clicking and then dragging some more. Or I can even take away selections by holding down the Alt key, clicking and dragging. So you can see as I get closer in and as I carefully select things, I can either add or remove from my selection. Again, I'm going to Shift click to add just a little bit more here. And because I'm using my laptop and my trackpad, I'm maybe not as accurate as I would be with a pen or even with the mouse, depending on how good you are with the mouse. Okay, so now I have this selection around his face. This allows me to do a number of different things in that very specific area. One thing I could try to do is cut this out. I could cut it out, I can copy it, I can move it around. So I'm going to move back to the selection tool from my lasso tool. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and I'm going to click and drag that portion that I have selected. And I have duplicated the portion of his face. Now, this is actually an active copy that is in the same layer. Okay? If I were to deselect this marquee using Command D, this face now exists in the same layer. Okay? So it becomes part of the whole thing. But in Photoshop, I have the option to add multiple layers. So I want to show you that real quick. I'm going to go back to my history and move back in time. And instead of leaving this on the same layer, I'm going to use key command, Command X, and cut that face out. And then I'm going to Command V, paste it back in as a new layer. And as you can see on the right side, we have a new layer. So I can drag this around independently. Okay, now that's a pretty significant edit right there. But you'll find ways to interact with Photoshop and get creative and have a little fun with photos. But I did tell you that I want your edits to be subtle. So let's not go too crazy. But just to illustrate what we can do with multiple layers, I want to show you some blend modes. The blend modes are located here where in a box it says normal. It's a selection box and I have a drop down. And they're divided up into different categories. This top category, darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn, and darker color, basically make things darker. They overlap with some degree of transparency, and the colors interact in a way that darkens. So if I were to choose multiply, you can see how it's transparent. I can see through it, and the colors are interacting in a way that adds a darkening effect where they overlap. So if I were to even move this back into position on top and realign it, you can see how that darkens his face. All right? Versus if I turn this off and back to normal, then I don't really notice. See, it's slightly on the line. All right, the second set where it says lighten, screen, color dodge, linear dodge, and lighter color effectively lightens everything as the colors interact. Again, there's transparency involved, okay, but it has an overall lightening effect. Then you have overlay, soft light, hard light, vivid light, linear light, and this begins to increase the color interaction dynamic a little bit. Sometimes almost you don't notice significance other than it looks maybe a higher chroma. So it's a little bit more intense. See, the colors getting intensified and darkening as well. Again, it's transparent. So these are blend modes. Blend modes that you might use most often would include multiply, screen, overlay. The other ones you can experiment with if you want to, but our goal is not to create edits that are super noticeable. We want to create an experience that the pictures are, they look better, more interesting, but not particularly edited. All right. All right, so we've looked at selection tool, rectangular marquee, elliptical marquee, the lasso tool, which also allows you to select from freehand to a multi-click polygonal lasso tool. So I can click, 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 click a selection. Okay? You can always use double click to close your selection at any time. To get rid of my marquee, Command D gets rid of it on the Mac. We've looked at layers and how I can create multiple layers to have different effects and allow things to interact using blend modes, like we looked at in the drop-down. I want to mention one other thing. Up at the top of the Photoshop menu, under the Layer menu, you'll see New Adjustment Layer. New Adjustment Layer lets you apply some edits, such as changing the brightness or contrast or even the hue and saturation. And you can apply that as a separate layer to a very specific layer or to an entire image or a multiple group of layers. So in this case, I just want to use this layer. I'll choose the text box or the checkbox here, click OK, and then I'm going to make my adjustments here to the brightness and contrast. I can increase the brightness overall, bring it back down, enhance the contrast, offer some clarity. I think the thing you want to be careful about is when you're making these kinds of edits that you don't affect the overall image by making any one area overly light or overly dark so you lose detail. You want to focus on edits that will enhance the image. So again, that is a adjustment layer. Blend modes up here in the selection box, adjustment layers available up in the menu under the layer option. All right, so on the toolbar, once again, selection tool at the top, that lets you grab things that are selected. If I try to grab something right now, the only thing I'm grabbing is information in the adjustment layer I made. I have to select the layer itself if I want to move it around. So if you're ever trying to move something around and you're wondering why won't it move, it's most likely because you don't have the layer selected over here. Rectangular and elliptical marquee, lasso, and polygonal lasso. We looked at the zoom tool, which is a magnifying glass. And the other thing I want to show you right now is the crop tool. So the crop tool lets me adjust how the photo is cropped in general. I can grab a portion of it. You can see how it's keeping the format, it's keeping the proportion of the image itself as I crop. It's also showing me something interesting, a little rule of thirds box. Okay? And then I can grab that box and I can say position his head on a focal point. And then I kind of know exactly what my composition is. If you're wondering, is this centered, rule of thirds? Well, right now, he's right on a focal point. This is straight up rule of thirds. Okay, and I can continue to adjust things to alter my focal point by getting even closer here and zooming in. All the time, keeping in mind how my edges are interacting with the rest of the page. And when I'm ready to actually crop this, I would simply click on the checkbox in the upper right-hand corner of the Photoshop window. I'll double click on the magnifying glass to bring it back to 100%. All right, now I have a completely different version of this image, cropped. Just going to go back a step here. Double-clicking on the hand icon will bring you to a fit the screen view. Double-clicking on the zoom tool will bring you to a 100% view. But this doesn't help me as much because it's so large. I just want it to fill the screen so I have a better understanding of it overall. When I am cropping, there's one other option I can choose for cropping. Well, there's multiple options, but right now I have it selected to do the same proportion as the original image, but I can change that from anything from a preset like a square or say 16:9 widescreen film, specific pixel numbers, or I can enter in my own preset numbers. Okay. So there's some options there that you can change and adjust. I could actually just set that information right into the boxes here. And when I crop, it allows me to choose a resolution. So this brings me to one last crucial point about editing pictures. If we were to look at the size of this image, so I selected image and image size, I can see that it's 20.3 megabytes. That is the file size. Okay, that's how much information is there. The dimensional size in pixels is listed here. And it's also listed in inches here. You can see it's 42.667 inches wide by 32 inches tall. That's a big poster size image. Okay, but you can also see that the resolution is low at a screen image. So a lot of times what we'll end up doing is making a smaller dimension image because we don't need something as big as we have it, and then we'll increase the resolution. All right, so if I wanted to change the image by a percentage, if I'm going to increase the resolution to say 300, all right, that's more than 3 times as large, I can change the size of the image to a percentage of what it originally was, and that way I have a higher resolution image at a smaller dimension. It looks really sharp, but it's smaller in dimension. So I'm going to change this percentage down to 25%. Click OK. I'm going to double click on the hand, bring that up to fill the screen. As you can see, I still have good resolution. Okay, you can begin to see as I increase it to 200%, it's starting to get pixelated. Okay, you can see the individual pixels now as I'm getting larger and larger. This is at 600%. So definitely a change in the number of pixels available and the size of the image versus if I were to go back without having changed the size. Right now I'm looking at this image at 21.9%. If I go back and try to look at this image at, this is 200 now, this is 600. You can see the difference in the amount of information I have in here. Okay. Jonah. Yeah, you don't have to ask me. If you have to go, just go. I trust you. All right. Questions? Okay, let's spend, let's see, we have till 25? 20. 20. All right, so we got about 10 minutes. Let's take some time to make some edits and then show me what kind of edits you're making. Make edits that are subtle but enhance using a combination of probably focusing on blend modes and adjustment layers. Make sense? All right. I'll give you a few minutes to tinker with one or two.